second. Okay. Can I have this in the corner? Actually, no, it goes away.
Present.
Yeah. There you go. So just tell me when, because I can't see you.
Okay. And you're good.
Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to be offering this for you and to be diving into a topic that is so frustrating for so many women. And what we're going to be talking about is optimizing female hormones. And so, again, we're so excited to dive into this topic as it's going to really dive into a lot of misconceptions and hopefully bring some light to some questions you've had for a while, and also just help relieve some confusion and anywhere where you feel like you need to grow and learn in your own journey. So we will just get started. So the overview of this seminar and webinar, we're going to be going over a few things provided here. So the first one is Hormones 101, and these are going to be the phases of each cycle and understanding how to handle each phase with awareness and confident action towards change. Second is going to be mindset and becoming aware of your hormone changes so you can adapt to each fluctuation with a positive and knowledgeable mindset. Number 3, we're going to be talking about exercise to gain insight and understanding on how exercise will benefit you during each phase of your cycle, the changes that happen, and also what would be best for you and your personal energy. And with nutrition, we're going to be growing to become aware of your nutrition choices and how to better your choices for your hormone health, and a supplement guide towards the end to support your health as well. And we're also going to include a Q&A at the end. So if you're on this, go ahead, either comment live questions below in the chat box. Otherwise, later on, this is going to be recorded, so you can provide questions later on as well if you have them. And I know that we'll always get back to you on those. Tonight's goal, what is tonight's goal? It is going to be awareness, because you're going to believe that you'll leave with this training with practical applications for you to feel empowered to take action towards optimal hormonal health. So the first one we'll go over is Hormones 101. And these are going to be the phases of your cycle. And so depending on who is listening and what your personal journey is, this might be different for everybody, as not everybody has a menstrual phase, or at least goes through that if you're taking hormonal birth control and maybe you don't bleed, or maybe you don't ovulate. So this could look a lot different for everybody depending on your journey. But for the most part, it is for most women going to include these 4 stages. The first one you're going to be going through, and we'll go over through the cycle days after these next few slides, but the first one is the menstrual phase. The second one is the follicular phase. The third one is ovulation. And the last is the luteal phase. So in the menstrual phase, you can see that obviously your endometrium is shedding, and that is what is going to cause the bleed. And the next, it's going into the follicular phase, in which you can see the egg is developing and moving on through, or at least working on moving on through your fallopian tubes and into your ovulation phase. It starts to thicken your endometrium so you can eventually shed that lining, if so, but if not, preparing for a baby. And then last but not least, if an egg is not fertilized, it will get released. And that leads us to the question, what day of your cycle are you on today? And so some women have no idea what phase they're on. Some have never kept track, some do right now, which is awesome. But we do encourage you to start to keep track of those things, just because it is so empowering as a woman to know what day of your cycle you're on. But not only that, because tracking your signs, your symptoms, what you're feeling, what you're going through, your moods, everything like that is so important, and and vital to know more about yourself, but also to make changes for the future. And if you don't know those things, you can't make any changes. So I encourage you to write that down if you want to figure that out, and we'll go into it how to find that out today if you don't know. And so that leads us into, how do I learn to track my cycle and my symptoms, if you're asking that question. So first step is to count back from the first day of your last period till now. For example, if it was last month, February 10th till now, that would be a little over 30 days or so. So if you have to write that down, go ahead and grab a sheet of paper and a pen and write that down and look at a calendar and count back on your cycle days. And you can even go back even further to see if you tend to notice some irregularities with a lot of those things and inconsistency. So I encourage you to do that. So track now with a calendar and a piece of paper and count those days. And so that leads me to also say that the average cycle length for most women is around 28 to 35 days. And so that's not for everybody. Some women have a much shorter time, maybe 24 to 25 days, and some women are on the longer scale, so 35 or more. But an average cycle length to produce those hormones in a healthy way is around that time. So tracking your cycle continued, you can also, another popular option is to track on an app, rather than just a piece of paper and pen if you're old-fashioned like that. Some recommended options for an app is one called Kindara. Kindara and Daisy View, which you'll also see, are two temping option apps, in which we can answer any questions you have on that. But basically that is just tracking your temperatures to track your fertility, which is something I highly advise. I do it personally, and I think it is a wonderful option to really gain some insight on your personal cycle and your hormone fluctuations. But Kindara and Daisy View, mostly Kindara, just has an option just to track your cycle days. But I really recommend it because it also allows you to track your cervical fluid, your mucus, your moods, your any other symptoms you might be experiencing. It allows you to track all of those things. So I think that's a really awesome option. And there's another one called a Flow app. So there's really any out there, but I really suggest Kindara because of all the symptoms you can log and try to watch for those consistencies month to month. And it also allows you to input data on each cycle, like I had said, and gain insight, not only what phase you're in, but how you feel. And so, as I said before, some of those outside symptoms you might notice that you can log, but other things you can log, like hunger, fatigue, your mood swings, things like that. And this is going to be a full chart on your typical 28-day cycle. Like I said, though, this graph right here is much different for every woman. I know that most people get the idea that most women ovulate on day 14, but that's not always the case. It's just a window. So every woman is very different. The menstrual phase can look a lot shorter for some women, or longer depending on. So the average length, 28 to 35 days. Again, the 4 phases, the menstruation that goes into follicular, and the luteal, ovulation, and then the luteal. So it goes around in that way. So as we can see here too, it also gives us a little bit of an insight. If any ladies out there right now are trying to conceive, this is a huge, huge deal to really start to track your symptoms and to just really get aware of your body. It's so empowering to grow that knowledge, just to know what your body's doing and how it's meant to function as women. It's incredibly made, women's bodies are, and so it's so wonderful to be able to know what it's doing, and not just guess or not know and just kind of throw in the towel if it's too confusing for you. Whether you're trying to prevent or plan pregnancy, it's a very, very big deal. So menstruation, you are the least fertile during this time. being that you're bleeding. And so leading up to that, again, here's the start of the cycle days, counting into what goes into your follicular phase, into your ovulation phase. So typically they say about 12 to 15 days past your cycle is when you start to be fertile. So that is the best chance your body is wanting a baby. So you can, if right now you need to write that down, go ahead. And like I said, to download those apps, that would be super helpful for you. And then going into the luteal phase. So the biggest thing right here with your follicular phase is you are mostly producing, at least in the beginning, you are higher in progesterone. Now it's starting to level out into more of a steady consistency of both estrogen and progesterone. But once this luteal phase comes back, you are starting to feel a little more leveled out in your hormones. But most women later in their luteal phase start to really feel some of those symptoms, as we'll be going into in the next slides, what you'll actually be feeling throughout this whole cycle. So again, another graph to show exactly what this looks like. Those small days in the beginning, your follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal phase. And again, it looks different for everybody, but as long as you are keeping track some way, somehow, over an extended period of time, it's going to be so helpful for you. And again, if you have any questions on this, please comment if you are in this thread right now. So we will go into exactly what kind of signs and symptoms you'll be feeling in each cycle, in each phase. And the first one being menstruation. So first stage of your cycle is day 1. And you are obviously going to be feeling some PMS symptoms if you're the average woman. And however, it is not common, or it's common, but it's not normal to feel such intense PMS symptoms. To the point, I think that's probably one of the biggest complaints and struggles with most women, is that it's just too much to bear, too much to handle. So they just start to go on some kind of hormonal contraceptive to cover that up. And I think that while I understand and I completely empathize with that, but I think it is the best thing to try to rid out those issues and what is making this so intense in the first place. And that's what we can go into a little bit later, talking about your nutrition and your exercise and how to alleviate some of those symptoms. So you might feel things like first fatigue, backache, cramps in the first few days. But what's happening is the shedding of your endometrium because of an unfertilized egg. And during this time, it is starting to increase progesterone. Estrogen, like I had said in the last slide, estrogen starts to regulate back to follicular phase over that course of time. But as of right now, the progesterone is still dominant. Energy starts to level out throughout the phases. But during this and prior to this is probably when you're going to feel the most symptoms, probably quote unquote your worst, and typically lasts 3 to 7 days. So again, here's a small phase you can look right back into and get to look at that. And next it leads into your follicular phase. And so again, this is where hormones start to level out. Estrogen is starting to increase again. And so after, most women can probably relate to this, is when right prior to PMS week, prior to menstruation, you probably feel your worst, because that is exactly when hormones are starting to shift. And so typically the week of your menstrual period, you feel just fine. You feel pretty good actually, because your hormones are starting to level out. And now after your cycle, you feel pretty good. You notice if you're active, you'll feel very good in the gym again. You have your energy back. And that's because estrogen is our friend. Estrogen as a woman is a very, very powerful and good hormone for our muscle health, our energy, and so many other things. And progesterone starts to steady out. Your mood is steady, like I said, your better energy is back, and your workouts feel strong. Also, some things to note As I said about the muscle building, your insulin sensitivity is high, so you absorb your glycogen and your carbohydrates best in this phase, and your body is efficiently using your food for energy, which is so awesome. Our body is meant to do that as a woman. Men are not this way. Men thrive off of testosterone, but women are, our bread and butter is obviously both of them, but estrogen is a very good thing in this case. It makes us feel very good. And so this lasts from the time you stop bleeding till you ovulate all the way around. And so this goes directly into the ovulation phase, typically around day 12 to 14 or 15, depending on, again, please try to now track this if this is something you want to really try to dig into a little bit deeper, because this will give you a large insight on when you're ovulating. But the most important thing, you guys, about the ovulation phase is what many women don't realize is that if you're taking any kind of hormonal birth controls or contraceptives, you are probably, if they're hormonal, probably not going to be making these hormones anymore in a sufficient amount because of the synthetic hormones already coming in, whether that's through an IUD or a pill or something other or another. So that's really important to note, because ovulation occurs to make those hormones out of our ovaries. And so our ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and other things that are so important for our health. And if we're not making those in sufficient amounts for what our personal body needs, it's going to be lacking something. And you will notice that in other symptoms, whether it's your mood is off. And I'm sure many of you women, I know plenty of women have contacted me with that exact issue, struggling with those things because of hormonal birth control. So if you are not taking it, you get a huge advantage to get to see what is probably happening during this phase, and you're making estrogen and progesterone. So during this time, during ovulation, your progesterone is increasing, so your temperature starts to increase as well, and your estrogen is decreasing, and you notice a slight energy shift because your body is going to want to be preparing for a baby during this time. And if not, it's going to go right into a luteal phase where that egg is going to get released. And sometimes some women, if they're very in tune with their body, you might start to feel some symptoms of your ovulation phase that almost feel PMS-like. So you might feel a twinge. That's a very common symptom. You might feel a twinge on each ovary, one or the other. I've heard sometimes one month it's on the right, the next month it's on the left. Every woman is very unique that way. And also some maybe mood swings. You might be a little more exhausted than usual. Every woman is very different. Again, it is so empowering and important to know what's happening in each phase. If you do not have the information right now or the knowledge to track those things, you get to gain that insight now. As I had stated, you will not make these hormones sufficiently while you're taking something else. And then, so after the ovulation phase, if that is something that you go through, now it is going to be shifting into the luteal phase, which most women feel the most and struggle the most with. So ovulation has started and the egg is released. And so you are going to gain PMS-like symptoms because your estrogen is decreasing. And so that is going to be something pretty significant, just because I know a lot of women who complain of physical hunger, which is so normal because your estrogen is decreasing. It is very normal to notice hunger and it not be just emotional. And you also will, most women and most really anybody, if they have physical hunger, you're going to crave certain things. And the reason why you're craving certain things is because your serotonin is also decreasing. I know this phase just seems like all hell is breaking loose, but it's not. It is for such a purpose. And so your serotonin is decreasing. So that is the reason for craving. So if you feel that chocolate thing coming on, and it's okay if you want to fulfill that, but there's a reasoning behind it. Same with caffeine because you're so tired. And so there are the reasons for those things. So progesterone is increasing. And so that is where things can get very, very symptomatic because your energy is going down, your gym performance is going down, sore breasts, higher temperature, less strength. You do not even want to go into the gym. And one thing I wanted to note as well, being that estrogen in the later phases of the follicular phase and ovulation phase are leveling out, that is probably the best time to start to weight train with the most intensity. And by no means do you have to track every time that you go to the gym and what cycle phase you're on and what kind of workout you should do depending on. It is just a guideline and a better understanding of what your body is doing. So you might feel better, giving yourself some grace and getting to decrease your workout intensity, at least to something different with higher cardiovascular focus versus strength when your strength just isn't there for a purpose. Not saying that you can't be disciplined and push through it, but just giving your body some grace there and understanding. Mood swings, and as I had said before, serotonin decreases. And so after those things are set in place, we want to go over how mindset, nutrition, and exercise can impact your hormones long-term with these decisions. So how exactly is your food making you feel? And so take a moment to reflect on that. How is your food making you feel? Any of these things you can resonate with. Is it making you feel energized, lethargic, possibly inflamed, inflammatory? Is it causing indigestion? Your food isn't sitting with you right, you're not digesting it well. Are you feeling fatigued, bloated? And bloated, not just like you ate too much or drinking too much, but just not digesting things the way you could. So one thing I touched just briefly on in those last slides is choosing nutrition that is going to be working for you rather than against you. And there's many of you women who have their nutrition in place. However, PMS or premenstrual syndrome, those symptoms do not have to be dramatic. And these hormone shifts that naturally happen in all of our bodies every day do not have to be something to fear or dread. You can start to make adjustments in your mindset, nutrition, and in your training and exercise to support these things so the energy shifts are not that bad and you can safely land them. Just think of a plane when they just roughly land. We don't want that with our hormones. And so one thing that would be so helpful is recommending an anti-inflammatory diet and food to support your energy and hormone health. So anything that is inflammatory. And so this is something that is greatly researched in a resource that I provided in the PDF that is going to be in your hands. It's a book called The Period Repair Manual by Lara Brighton, and she goes over exactly these things and talking about inflammatory foods and how they can trigger those symptoms to be even worse, but not to mention just our daily energy, our focus, and the way that we are processing everything. So those inflammatory foods are going to be alcohol, excess refined sugars, dairy, and gluten. And so if you have to write these things down, please do, because a wonderful opportunity would be to reflect in your own current diet what would be happening right now with some of these things and how they could be a potential trigger for you. And as I said, these can not only be the culprit for low energy levels, irregular cycles, but also other hormone-related disruptions, such as PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and amenorrhea, when you do not bleed whatsoever. And so this is a large topic, but talked about in very, very brief detail right now. So PCOS and amenorrhea are going to be just hormonal disruptions that you can restore hormonal health back. But some of these things, by no means, some of these things, especially, um, I'm going blank with with what I'll come back to that. What other um, hormonal disruptive, um, you know, kind of like amenorrhea, totally going blank. Anyway, um, but some of those things can be genetic, but these, however, are very, very influenced by what you're doing and how to handle those things. And so that is very, very personal and very up to you whether or not you know your own personal journey and what you're going through. But you can always control your decisions and what you're putting into your body and how you're moving your body. And so while some of these things can be genetic, and some of them very well could not be, you can grow out of some of these things and restore your hormonal health by controlling these decisions, by decreasing the alcohol. By no means do you have to completely cut out some of these things, but just taking a deeper look at what you're going through every day and what you're feeding your body and how you're moving your body. So that kind of leads us to go into your meal structure. What does that exactly look like, if you're wondering? And so meals should consist of lean proteins, fish, chicken, turkey, eggs, healthy fats, avocados, omegas, things like that, oils, and fiber and complex carbohydrates like potatoes and fruits and vegetables. Just like down below, 4 to 6 servings of each if possible. I know that that might seem like a hefty load for some people, especially at first. But even if you just start with one of each, if something right now, if you were a sugary coffee person and you have Dunkin' Donuts every day and you love Swedish fish, and that is something that you do all the time, just try removing one of those things or 2 of those things and replacing it with something else. Maybe instead of a pastry, you have a fruit instead. And maybe instead of a sugary coffee, you have a black coffee with cream. You make slow adjustments towards some of these things because they truly, truly can be making a huge impact on your hormonal health, on your regularity, on the way that your hormones fluctuate, especially alcohol. Alcohol, we wouldn't really think of it as a huge deal. And for most women, the average consumption is obviously 1 a day, but even a couple a week can have a drastic difference on our health. So whatever that looks like for you, to be moderate but not deprived, I highly suggest leaning into that and what that looks like for you. And it's not depriving, but moderation. And so the biggest thing too that can really grow into a healthy mindset to impact your hormones is having a community of support. And what that looks like is a community of support in exercise. Maybe that is an exercise class, small groups, either with a church community or something rather another, friends with common goals, etc. And having an exercise routine that supports your goals but also improves your health and well-being. So whether that's yoga, cardio, weights, at-home workouts, anything to support your recovery and your hormones. And so ladies, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's going to the gym twice a week, but the other days you love to do yoga or you couldn't make it to the gym, so you are going to do a body weight workout at home, or even just go for a walk with your kids or with your dog. It is totally up to you, but something is so much better than nothing. And just focusing on what can you do every day to just do something a little bit better, 1% better. And focusing on factors that could be limiting to your hormonal health. So if you still have that sheet of paper, please write this down. Go ahead and reflect on anything that you believe might be limiting your hormonal health, whether that is a lack of exercise, your nutrition, degrading self-talk, maybe even a contraceptive like hormonal birth control. Any of these things that might be fogging your glasses, so to speak, on your health and how this can be impacting your hormones can be a huge limiting factor and also something you can grow so far from if you even choose to exercise or go to a class once a week, or to change a couple things up in your daily nutrition. And even by the way that you look at yourself in the mirror, if you look at yourself in the mirror every day and you have a criticizing comment every single time, and I know that we all do it, and it's sometimes more than we'd like to admit, but if you are willing to look at yourself in the mirror, as awkward and forced as it sounds, to say that I love my body, I love my body, I'm willing to change it, but no matter what, I love it. And really just catching yourself, replacing those bad thoughts with something good. We can never completely get rid of a thought about ourselves, but if we replace it with something much better, and gracious and loving and compassionate with ourselves, you would be so surprised on the way that we would look at ourselves afterwards. And so we challenge you to do those things. So again, please write this down if you have that pencil and paper by you. What are your limiting factors right now? And how do you feel about it? And if you can, please note those in the comments if you feel comfortable. If not, totally fine. Just reflect on that. I'm going to go back to my slide. Sorry about that. And so your next steps is going to be downloading the resource guide list. And so you can go ahead and continue to ask questions in the Fit Me Forever group. Otherwise, we would love to provide you with the PDF of this download. And what this is going to include is so many options for not only supplements, but that Daisy and the Kindara app that I had suggested to you. And also, it's going to provide a supplement list to all the different things that you can go into to help support your hormonal health. And if you choose to buy one of those books, it goes into great detail on some of those supplements you can be doing to support your hormonal journey and the way that you feel in each cycle. Things like magnesium and zinc and omegas, different things like that, as well as the thermometers are listed in there as well. And if I'm missing anything, what do you ladies think?
I think this was great. Yes, we've got some questions rolling in, so we'll go ahead and cover some of the questions. One was submitted, so kind of have that on deck, and then Rita is tuning in, and she says, can you go over how recovery is affected over the course of your cycle? So maybe you can go back to the different phases where, I remember you mentioned that the luteal phase, and then the ovulation phase, and menstruation, how we might feel kind of during, if we're weight training versus maybe, I love how you just explained it as giving yourself grace. Like, it might not mean that you have to be so, oh, I can't weight train on this day, but just know if you're not going in the gym and feeling super strong or, hitting PRs, that, it's totally fine.
Right. No, totally. And so what phase, that was the luteal phase? Correct.
Yeah, we can go back to slide. I think it was slide 16 has the picture, if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Did you say slide 16?
Yeah, that has like the picture. So while you're talking, they can see. And then the luteal phase was the section where you said that your workout intensity will likely be decreasing, and just to kind of be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, so yes, this question about the recovery. So the biggest thing is just knowing, knowledge is power when we apply it, but so much more when we know what our hormonal functions are doing. And so both progesterone and estrogen are great things for our bodies, but estrogen is the one where, and I know you guys know what I'm talking about, especially you guys, where you feel really good in the gym. Like you are at it, you feel good, you're stair stepping away, you're getting PRs, you feel really, really good. And more likely than not, estrogen is pretty high. And that's why we really suggest you to reflect on some of those things and really try to count back on your cycle days and to get into a good habit of those things, just because you get to really understand what is happening on every day of your cycle, because those hormones are fluctuating every day. Unlike a man, theirs is pretty consistent from day to day. Ours are changing every day. And so that luteal phase, our progesterone is pretty high. And so some of the symptoms of that is the fatigue. And so maybe, like you said, Kayla, and like I was mentioning, is giving yourself grace. While it is not an excuse to kind of write off that we should not stick to our program or just kind of throw in the towel for a week or so, that is not an excuse to write that off, but rather just, okay, giving yourself the grace and maybe doing something else that will not only feel better, but be better for you in the long run with how your body's functioning right now.
Sure. There's something I'd love to add to that too, is when you're in the luteal phase, or luteal phase, however you want to say that, you may just recognize that you need more sleep and a little bit more rest. And so obviously that's a huge component of recovery. And depending on what your training cycles look like, if you know what this, your cycle looks like, it's super important because you can anticipate and try to build in some extra rest, especially if you're training harder than normal. And I'd like to say too, that the younger that you are, you can tend to get away with some kind of not paying attention to your nutrition in your ovulation phase because you feel so good. But that nutritional support is super important as you move into the luteal phase, to be really mindful of what you need. That with that serotonin drop in that phase, you're just going to feel more sluggish and, again, maybe need more sleep or whatever. And good food is what's going to support that energy demand during that period. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, on the opposite side of that picture is the follicular phase. And so even though the first beginning part of a follicular phase is technically menstruation, a lot of people, Taylor, like Taylor had mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, is that usually you feel worse right before you start to bleed. And then once you start to bleed, day 1 is usually a little kind of crappy, but then day 2 and day 3, people are like, oh my gosh, like the wool is being removed from my eyes. I don't feel so crazy. And so by all means, I've even suggested to a lot of clients, go ahead and go into the gym, even on day 1 when you're not really feeling like it, because it can really just help the body continue going, especially in terms of like bloating and the digestive distress that can happen and, right before you start your period and the day you start. But it's also one of your strongest times. So because the estrogen is high and your progesterone stays steady, if you do push it, a lot of it can be mental, that whole mental component of, we kind of have this old school thought of, oh, I'm on my period, I'm going to feel bad. But when you start to really pay attention to your body, you start to realize that, oh my gosh, it's once I start my period, I feel normal again. It's right before that a lot of people actually feel bad. And so, like Taylor said, though, every single person is a little bit different. And I would say that even as I've aged, as I've moved, from my late 20s into my mid 30s, like my own cycle has changed without even having birth control for over a decade. So just be in tune with that, be gracious to your body, but take advantage of the phases where you're like, oh, wow, this could be really good. And like Coach Jody was saying, like support that with healthy nutrition, because it's kind of cyclical more than it is linear. It's this ongoing process where your body is always tapping into its latest storage, rather than, eating what you had for breakfast and using it at the gym. That's not how it is.
Right.
Our bodies are always being fueled by what we did the day prior and the day prior and the day prior. And that includes sleep and recovery and stress and water intake and food. So
Yeah, definitely. We have another question. Do you want me to go ahead and read it?
Oh yeah, go ahead and read it.
Sure. This one's from Jessica, and she says, I'm so excited for this call. Hormones, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. I'm sure that I'll think of more questions along the way, but here's what I have so far. Hormonal cravings. When it is time for my cycle, which is on a chaotic schedule at best, I cannot stop thinking or wanting certain foods. Foods I otherwise don't eat because, quite frankly, I no longer want. I no longer want fried foods or milk products. My cholesterol is garbage. But this last cycle, all I wanted was McDonald's ice cream and peanut butter filled pretzels. How do I combat this?
That is a super good question. And the first thing that I think of when it comes to that, I don't know if you guys maybe think the same thing, but kind of as I was talking about earlier, there is a reason why we have physical hunger, and it's not emotional. There very well could be physical hunger, and it's because your estrogen is dropping. And so there's a hormonal shift behind that. And so you're not crazy for feeling hungry, but however, it is pretty important to notice if the difference is physical hunger or emotional hunger. And if you start to crave some of those things, knowing if it has been a common tendency for you, you just have to kind of reflect on some of these questions. Have you been intaking those things every time you have a cycle? Is it a habit? Is it something that you always reach for every time that happens? And so that is just almost a habit that you want to go back to every time. Or a craving can sometimes, they're very, very real. Again, because serotonin is dropping, there's a reason why we want to opt for certain things, whether it's salty, whether it's sweet, something to restore that decrease somewhere. And so it's totally normal. But make sure to distinguish if it's emotional or not, and if it's just something out of habit as well. And there's a way you can control that. You can surely enjoy those things in moderation, but there's also just those better choices that you can go into as well that will make you feel so much better. Because a lot of times, as we had mentioned before, it is so common to load up on the coffee, load up on the chocolate, because those are the things that our bodies are going to want because we're tired and we just are craving those things. But to give our bodies what it really needs is super important as well. What do you ladies think?
I think when you have that drop in estrogen, there's a whole cascade of hormones that are happening, especially too, I think about ladies that might be training harder, like some of our gals that are in the membership group, they're now starting training plans, and maybe sometimes they're going to feel a little bit more tired at that time. The energy demand might be a little higher depending on where they're at. And maybe they do just need to eat a little bit more. A lot of times I find that women that are restricting severely are having the most drastic symptoms if they're not eating evenly throughout the 28 days or 30 days, and they're really starting to restrict. You might you feel thicker and kind of icky, bloaty during that time. You want food, but maybe you're mentally trying to battle that, can be a problem as well. I like to tell clients to think about, that this time is going to come around every month. That you may have struggled in the past with it. Think about what are those positive substitutes. Does that mean like a huge honkin' bowl of fruit and a handful of nuts? I'm talking eat till you can't eat anymore, because at some point you're probably going to feel full and satisfied with a combination of fruit or something like that. And yes, it's higher carb or whatever, but that's what your body is wanting in place of that serotonin, and that would be better than, say, the McDonald's ice cream or the peanut butter filled pretzels or whatever. So have those in mind, those choices that are going to be your go-tos, that maybe you don't indulge in, at other times during the month. Like I'm saying, I'm talking a big bowl of fruit or whatever. And let that, change your go-tos, because it does really start with, in your mind, and you get to choose, and your body and your hormones do not have to control your mental processes. You are not your body, right?
Yeah, Jody, I love how you mentioned, is exactly what I was thinking of, the consistency of total intake on a daily basis when you're thinking the whole cycle. Because a lot of the times, and I completely agree with all the women that have reached out to me, in the past about struggling with cravings around their cycle. It has never not, meaning that it always boils back down to the total amount of food that they're intaking. And so let me give you guys 2 examples. One example being when someone's working in contest prep, and I use contest prep as an example because it's the extreme. It's the extreme that we choose, and it's the extreme where you're going to find someone that has a ridiculous amount of discipline, abnormal amount of discipline, nothing that we would ever expect from a general health type client. So I like to use that as an example because there are a lot of things that a female will experience throughout contest prep. And one of those things being, if they're still having their cycle, which you really can for a long period of time, it becomes crazy intense. And a huge contributing factor to that is the low caloric intake the rest of the month that's happening. So now those symptoms are exacerbated. And so like Jody was saying, like, we give you guys the meal plan template as a baseline structure that is oftentimes more than what you're already eating. And there's this resistance, and it's a common resistance when someone wants to lose body fat to want to reduce their overall intake. And the caution that we just give you is that when you're consistently eating enough food and your metabolism calibrates, you guys have heard me talk about this before, we're just talking about general health and your metabolism. When your metabolism calibrates, then those cravings are not going to be so high. And so those bites of, dark chocolate, or, that one little kid's cone from McDonald's or whatever, it really does satisfy that craving. And it also doesn't throw you into some crazy caloric surplus.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to be gaining a lot of body fat. Now, if you're most of the month eating at this crazy deficit because you're trying to lose body fat, not only has your metabolism down-regulated and it's not as fast because it's adapted, it's trying to survive, then when you go and have these cravings and you try to be quote unquote, in moderation and not deprived, and you succumb to those cravings, those things are so calorically dense that it can practically double your caloric intake. And in all reality, there was an article I posted to you guys earlier this month about calories in and calories out. And is fat loss really that simple? And if you didn't read it, I really encourage you to go back and read it. It's written by Precision Nutrition, who we're all nutrition certified through. And what is really, really interesting is you're going to learn is that calories in and calories out do matter. There is a process to our body's energy stores that matters. And the reason why it's not quite as simple is because of the downregulation we talked about, because of the hormonal fluctuations we've talked about. And so the only way that you're going to know, does it work for me or does it not, is if you bring that intake up to a nice baseline to where, at least for, I like to say 2 to 3 months, because that gives you that 8 to 12 weeks of, how am I feeling? Maybe I'm not as crazy as I thought I was. I don't have all these cravings, because it really boils down to what you're eating on a daily basis. And it's worth the sacrifice of moving past the fear of possible weight gain, because if your metabolism has downregulated and you're eating at a baseline and you're noticing that scale going up a little bit, hang tight for just a little bit and let your body calibrate. Because I know, like, when Coach Taylor came off of birth control several years ago, there was this calibration of the body beginning to produce its own hormones, like not even having a cycle, starting to have a cycle. Is this normal? It's important to read, books like what she shared in the resources about the period repair manual, so you know what is clinically normal. Then you have to take that and overlay that on your body and say, what's normal for me in this stage of life?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
Jessica, I hope that answers your question in terms of cravings. Cravings are so multifaceted because, we're really, if you listen to our podcast guys too, we talk a lot about how cravings and feelings are fantastic guides for our body. We are emotional beings. And so if your cravings are emotional, we're not constantly saying, oh, put that away. No, if having pizza to celebrate or doing something feels nostalgic, like lean into that. Eating is enjoyable, and when we're able to do that in a moderate type of way and we serve ourselves in that way, grabbing a kitty cone from Mickey D's is not that big of a deal. It doesn't feel defeating. But if there's something else going on hormonally, Jessica, you had also mentioned that your cycle wasn't necessarily regular. And so there's kind of a lot going on there too, making it even more challenging to speak directly to, is it the onset of PMS? Is it the right before menstruation? Is it right after? Are your hormones regulating the way they should? Temping is a really cheap and easy way to figure out what your body is doing, because that progesterone will raise and lower your body temperature like clockwork. And so even if you don't want to go buy a Daisy app, just go to the drugstore and get a basal thermometer and set the alarm at the same time every day. And Kendara, Fertility Friend, there's a lot of different apps that are free that you can just put in the temperature. I did it for years. Just roll over, thermometer under your mouth, check it, and just start to see a pattern. And what you'll see is that, slowly throughout your cycle, after you bleed and as you begin to ovulate, that progesterone is increasing. You ovulate, it spikes, and then you see this big drop. And so you'll be able to recognize, oh, I'm feeling bad at the same time these things are happening with my hormones. And you might be able to find a regulated cycle, even if you're not bleeding when you're supposed to. It might just be that your lining isn't getting thick enough, but you are ovulating, or there's a lot of different reasons why you might not actually be bleeding.
Totally. I love that, Kaylin. That leads me to a good point too, just to preface with any of you women who might be struggling with some of those things, and you might be prompted to go to the doctor or whatever. And by no means are we, this is a disclaimer, are we going to recommend anything in a doctor's place. But Western medicine can have a drastic different opinion. And I was once going to visit the doctor, and I wanted my period back, for them to then tell me that I needed to get right back on the pill in order to bleed. And so because my endometrium was just not thick enough yet. And that's when I had gotten off of it after being on hormonal birth control for so long. So if you are that woman and you know that you are just not bleeding or something is irregular, hang tight. And if it is totally your choice if you want to continue to take a hormonal contraceptive, but just knowing that the less fogginess of anything that you're doing, the less you get to become more aware of your body by covering some of these things up. And it works very well for some people, but in order to restore that hormonal health and know what your body is going through, it's going to take less variables in order to know what's happening. So just hang tight and try your best to make these minor adjustments, whether it's in your nutrition, your exercise, mindset, all of it, one step at a time. And you will, once you're a patient, it might take years, but you will make those adjustments and you will reap the benefits.
Definitely. I would just like to add one thing, Taylor. This has been super awesome. I love it. What you're saying about the medical predisposition towards oral contraceptives and such. For thousands of years, people have been practicing birth control by temperature and heat methods quite successfully. And so there are ways, we want to let you know that there are healthier ways to be able to do that. And this education is just the beginning of some of that Taylor's presented here today. I think I love it that more and more younger women are really wanting to get in touch with this. And not just because they're not feeling well, but because they say there's got to be a better way. So I think that's super cool.
Yes,
Totally.
I love it. Well, guys, if you have any other questions that maybe you didn't even know what to ask until we got into all this stuff, don't be afraid to message in the Fit Me Forever group. That's exactly why we're there. It's exactly why we have it for you to be full support. The PDF is there for you to download with the hyperlinks to look into any of the resources that Taylor mentioned on the training today. And thank you for attending. This was awesome.
Thank you for this privilege.